my last video, the one with the optical shutter tester, I was saying that this camera, my FED2, has developed an issue that I haven't seen before in this camera, where when set to 500 of a second, the dial is a bit off. Sometimes the shutter starts moving and then immediately stops, so it gets locked until I release the shutter or until I fiddle with this selector. And I thought it would be a good moment to open it up and see what's inside, and of course make a video about it. It's not something that is likely to happen in an unopened camera, so this one was the first camera that I worked on, the first Soviet camera that I worked on and actually got back together, and it was pretty much salvaged from a box of parts, so it had been previously opened up and taken apart by a friend of mine. He somewhat got a bit over his head and decided to just give me everything, and so that I could maybe put it back together, which I did. I also replaced the curtains, and one of the problems was here in the curtain replacement, because I did not follow the initial attachment points, and that kind of messed up with the gearing and the timing. I tried to adjust it afterwards without opening the camera, and well, apparently I failed. So let's see, camera is loaded. There it is. When this happens, what you can see, if you can see in the video, so this is the leading edge of the first curtain, or the opening curtain, and just a bit to the right is the edge of the second curtain. Now the edge of the second curtain, when the camera locks in this position, is flush to the film gate, and the gap between the two curtains is difficult to measure, but I would say it's something like 1 millimeter. This is a flathead screwdriver that is 1 millimeter, and it almost goes between the two curtains, so it is less than 1 millimeter, maybe 0.8, something like that, which is not large enough from what I have seen in other Soviet cameras. That means my second curtain is positioned too far to the left. I probably tried different positionings so that I could improve on the shutter speeds, I think. I don't really remember what my reasoning was back then. Anyhow, if I set it to B, I can see what happens inside, meaning is it acting? Okay, so the shutter speed dial is loose, so I don't really know what speed I'm on, but this is certainly B. Okay, when the camera is set to B and the shutter is tripped, the edge of the first curtain is a good 4 millimeters, I think almost 4 millimeters beyond the left edge of the film gate, while the edge of the second curtain is almost flush to the right film gate's edge, which is not really ideal. Now in the Soviet cameras, this placement of curtain edges varies from camera to camera. I'm sorry about the knocking sounds, some good old neighbor is doing stuff, whatever. Normally, or ideally, I think the edges should be equally distanced from their respective film gate edges. So like this and this, with a total gap So this gap or distance plus this gap or distance should amount to, I don't know, 3 to 4 millimeters, something like that, but I think 3 millimeters would be a good starting point. Obviously, ideally you should respect the original attachment points, which would give you a certain distance between the two curtains, and also obviously taking into consideration or assuming that the Soviets did their part correctly, which is a bit of a hazard. Okay, now what do I think actually happens inside the camera? I think the tripper from the first curtain, so the shaft, the main shaft, will turn and will strike on the ledge. So it will strike on the ledge of the second curtain and will push it aside. So pretty much there's a pin that's connected to the first curtain. When that pin reaches this position, we'll push this aside, and this ledge will release the prong of the second curtain. Obviously, according to the time or to the position set on the shutter speed dial, that will happen sooner or later, meaning that the moment of release of the second curtain will happen sooner, so when the first curtain is still traveling, or later, or later, or later, or later, depending on your shutter speed. And what I think happens is that the tripper from the first curtain, or traveler, or I don't know which is the correct name for it, actually gets kind of stuck here. So it manages to reach this point without actually pushing the ledge far away enough that the second curtain can start traveling. And once that little pin gets here, nothing can push this aside and the shutter jams. Obviously, when I release my finger from the button, the latch moves up and releases both curtains at once. And I will try to, so this is B, this means that when it's on B, it's actually on 500. Let's try to make it happen again. Ah, I missed it. I'm trying to make it happen again so I can show you another little thing that led me to believe that this is the case. Unfortunately, it has a mind of its own. Come on, all right. So it has a mind of its own and only does what it wants. So when this happens, if I wiggle this, so imagine that this selector is actually physically linked to that prong that is, or that traveler that it's supposed to push on the ledge. Now that means that if I turn it counterclockwise, it should push back on the ledge just as it would have done when it was moving correctly clockwise. See? So it moved back on the ledge, but since I was rotating it like this, so like the same motion that happens when you are cocking the shutter, so when you are moving the curtains from one point to the other, the second curtain wasn't released, but it would have been released if there wasn't any direct linkage between the two curtains. I don't think this makes much sense if you don't see the image in your head, and I'm sorry for the improper use of the if clauses that I once knew how to use. Let's try it again. Oh, and when, I don't know if you saw it, a couple of times I had to turn the knob twice. So the first turn did nothing. And when that happens, I don't know if I can, I missed that one. Okay, so this is one thing. I'm moving it back a bit. I heard a little click, and when I'm letting it go, it goes back. Because when that clicking noise was heard, the latch, basically the traveler hit this point of the latch, which is the outermost tip, so moved it aside, and when I took my hand or the finger from the shutter speed knob, basically releasing the motion because I was keeping it place, both curtains start moving. So I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. About the other thing, that I had to wind once, nothing happened with the shutter, and on the second wind the shutter actually got from this point to this point. What happened was this. So when I release the camera, you have the two pins here, right? These two pins need to engage with one another so that the motion is transmitted from the winding knob to the actual shutter. When you release the camera, this gear goes down, the pins disconnect, this gear that just went down starts spinning because it's directly linked to the shutter, and then it should, when you release the button, it should go back, pushed by this spring plate, in such a way that it's I don't know the exact distance, but let's say 1 millimeter behind, or in front, actually in front of the pin of the take-up spool. If the pin from the take-up spool is something like this, so if this little gear on the bottom, after it makes its rotation, kind of gets aligned with the pin from the take-up spool, the two will now hit head-on. And that means that when you are winding the shutter, the upper pin, the one from the take-up spool, will slip, will get in front of the lower pin, and will need to make a full rotation before being able to engage with the lower pin and thus start pulling the shutter curtains along. And that means if it happens in real life while you are shooting the camera, that you will have to advance blank film. You'll need to advance a certain length of film before the actual advancing motion happens. And obviously that sucks, and there's nothing you can do about it. So if it happens, it happens. You just need to advance until it works. Like this. See? It's moving, it slipped in front, it does a full turn, and you feel it on the winding lever that it moves very easily, and then it loads the shutter. I am not totally sure how you can fix this. In Meisenberg's book on the Soviet cameras, this thing is described, but honestly I don't remember if there was a solution. Because in my mind it's something that you should be able to adjust, otherwise if it happens, it happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I don't remember. I will try to look it up. I don't even remember on what camera it was described, but probably on the Fed Zorky chapter, because basically they all have the same design, and if it was not on the Fed Zorky, that refers to Zorky 1 and Fed 1, then it might have been on Fed 2. Subsequent cameras are spawned from the same design. Okay, let's take the top cover off from the Fed and see what's going on. To take the cover off, you need to obviously remove that little eyepiece, you need to remove this with where is my, oh, here it is. So not very complicated, actually it's super straightforward and quite simple to remove the top plate. The only little niggle is actually this diopter adjuster. You need to remove the advance knob, one long set screw that's keeping it in place, remove the knob, pressure washer, counter dial, another washer beneath it that may or may not have these washers. Okay, you have one screw here, and usually these screws are not chromed, they are regular sunken head screws. You need to remove the shutter speed knob, just loosen up the two screws and it will pop out. And always, if you have a camera that only has one screw, the knob itself is also screwed on. Alright, and you also need to remove this little lens or prism that is the vertical, not is, but has the vertical adjustment for the rangefinder. So obviously this requires readjusting your rangefinder afterwards. Two more screws on the front, and I'm not really totally sure, maybe the cold shoe. Yes, the cold shoe as well. In some cameras you need to remove the cold shoe, in other cameras you don't. For instance, in the Zorky 4 you don't. In Zorky 1s, for some you need to remove all three screws. In others you only need to remove one screw, this one. The other two are just keeping the cold shoe connected to a bracket underneath, but the third one, the lower right one, is actually connected to, come on, another piece inside, and that kind of keeps everything connected to the actual top plate of the camera. Okay, three screws there, and now you need to remove this collar. That should also unscrew. Okay, lift mostly from the right side and slide over the diopter adjuster, and that's it. Top plate removed. Alright, and now I can put back the winding knob to see what's inside. Okay, and the shutter speed is now set to 500th of a second. So this is the tripper or the traveler that is connected to the main shaft, and it will move from here to here when set to 500th of a second, and will push this latch aside. Okay, this one worked, this one worked, this one worked. And now I'm going to simply repeat until it does. So one problem, um, until I managed to get it to get locked, one problem is that the pin on this gear almost even sometimes it actually touches the upper pin. So it touches it and then slides in front, but from time to time it touches it and remains there. So I will certainly need to see how I can address this problem. Let's try. Well, I'm not convincing him to lock. I don't know why. It's like once the top plate has been removed, now it's working. And I don't understand why. Okay, I'm a bit puzzled, but what I do remember from back then, so um, let's just say that when you run into some kind of a problem and you think you have the obvious answer, try to, I don't know, to sit on the problem for a bit before taking more, let's say, radical measures. What I do remember is that the latch wouldn't always stop the second curtain. So um, it would happen that instead of pushing the shutter button and the latch stopping the second curtain, it would just slip it. And I really didn't understand what was going on. I was looking for solutions, and one convenient solution for me at that time was the worst of all, actually. I decided to increase the length of this gap. So I just drilled a bit, or better said, I filed a bit of this edge. And because I increased the length, obviously, there was more time for the latch to to grab this little prong while going down, because it goes down. So it needs a very short amount of time, but it needs some time of, let's say, free motion. So it needs some time for it to go down while that thing is spinning. So this is the prong of the second curtain, this is the gap in the latch. The latch is sitting higher. The prong starts to move while this one descends. It descends because it's pushed down by this spring. So it needs to, the gap needs to be large enough that this motion is permitted. So this prong can move from here to somewhere here in the time that the latch needs to go down and stop the prong, if it makes sense. If the gap is too small, the prong will have enough time to reach this position or even beyond before the latch goes down, and the latch will miss it, so it won't catch. And I think that is what happened, and my decision was to actually enlarge this gap instead of studying the mechanism for a bit longer, or as much as needed for me to actually understand it, because the problem was in fact the attachment of the curtains. The curtains were poorly attached, And I didn't consider moving it, so moving the timing like one tooth to this side. The idea is that if you remove this cap, there is a gear. If you take out the gear and shift it by one tooth, you will actually modify the resting position. So where the curtains stop, a hard stop, so you can't advance any more than this. So when you do that, the edge of the curtain is now somewhere here. Instead, it should have been somewhere here, because by shifting the end position, or the hard stop position, you are in fact shifting the position of this little prong. So in my case, the tip of the prong was too much to the left. That's why it wasn't catching. It wasn't the actual um, latch that was at fault, but the position of the prong. So instead of actually moving the prong one tooth that way, um, one click, let's say, that way by shifting the position of the gear, I made the stupid mistake of actually enlarging this gap. And what I think happens now, although I can't really prove it because it simply doesn't want to behave. Oh, there you go. It behaved. Excellent. It's exactly what I suspected. This has gone beyond the tip of the latch, and it actually stopped against the prong, which in turn is stopped against this little bit of cutout. It makes sense now, right? So this traveler, this is the first curtain, has slipped beyond the tip of the latch, so there's nothing pushing on the latch now, and it stopped there because this prong also goes a bit here to the right. See? So pretty much now we have a shitty sandwich of parts that are stuck against one another. This one is stuck between the tip of the latch and the prong. The prong is stuck against this part of the latch. Okay, if the latch would have been, if this edge of the latch would have been like this, so like, I don't know, 0.3 of a millimeter to the right and straightened, it wouldn't have happened, because it it certainly would have released it. What happens is that in some cases, in some rare cases, because you saw how many times I had to try to catch it like this, this traveler pushes against the ledge, so the ledge is pushed aside, but it manages to slip beyond this tip of the ledge. The ledge returns to initial position before the little prong has the chance to slip and start moving, if that makes sense. And it all happens because this cutout is too long. If it would have been shorter, this mishap wouldn't have had time to actually happen. Something like that. Alright, so now I have two options. Option number one would be to actually get a replacement. So another latch. And I might have a spare one somewhere in a box or something. The problem is that they changed the design of the latch so many times that it's not just about getting the latch from a Fed 2. You need to get the latch from the proper Fed 2. And that might not be, let's say, on stock. The other solution, I think, is to actually increase the tension on the second curtain. I will check to see if the two curtains are balanced, because if the second curtain is a bit slow, which happens most of the times, even on my cameras, I think I have this tendency to try to keep them with working with as low of a tension as possible, and sometimes the second curtain is just a bit slow, not enough to actually see something in the pictures, at least maybe if I don't know, if I'm taking pictures of a totally uniform subject like the blue sky. But sometimes I do have this tendency, and increasing the speed of the second curtain, or better said the tension on the second curtain, would also mean increasing the acceleration rate for the second curtain, so I would pretty much give it a chance to move faster, move out of the way, and not be caught by the ledge. That is the theory. In order to test the theory, I am going to use my phone to actually do a slow-mo on 1/500th of a second, and hopefully I will get the motion that I'm interested in, so the motion of the two curtains. Let's see. No, I did not. Okay, we have some problems visible in the video. I'm going to just show you like this because I'm not in the mood to edit. So this is the slow-mo video. So there is a slight increase of the gap between the two curtains, which obviously means the second curtain is a bit slow. But the biggest problem that I see, it's that. So the second curtain is bouncing, and I don't think there is anything that I can do about it. The only thing would be to actually have its edge moved even more to the left. But the problem is that the edge is already too much to the left. If I decrease tension, that will make this problem even worse. And if you look at the overlap between the two curtains, so I am only moving the second curtain now. See, the overlap is extremely small. I will let's look at another thread that hasn't been worked on for a quick comparison. So I give you McDusty, that is very dusty. Okay, so the edge is pretty much in the same spot on both cameras. But if I advance this one a bit, there is more overlap. Obviously, this is the quality of Russian craftsmanship. The gap is anything but even, so they are touching here and there's a big gap on the other side. But the overall overlap is obviously a lot bigger on this one than on this one. That means that I don't have to, actually it means that I would need to, on one hand, move the second curtain a bit to the right, but on the other hand move the first curtain a lot on the right. And even so, the curtain bounce is a bit worrying. Being second curtain bounce, it means that you will have an overexposed area on this part of the film, which is the right part of the frame as you look at it. I should do something about this other fed because it's a red one. Yeah, someday. Okay. I'm trying to see if I actually have a light leak here when it bounces, but we'll see. Okay. I'm going to think about what I'm doing next. My first attempt will be to actually find a spare ledge and see if that works. If it doesn't work, then I will have to slightly increase the tension on the second curtain with the risk of making the bounce even worse, but with a somewhat good chance of actually fixing the issue. And I will also look into this. Okay. I will probably add another shorter part with my conclusions because I'm sure this video is extremely long already. Okay, let's see what happens. Alright, I think I might have some conclusions. I managed to find a spare ledge. Nothing changed, so the same behavior. Although this one has the original cutout, so it's nothing out of the ordinary, nothing modified. But I studied the situation a bit and I came to the conclusion that it only happened when that prong remained something like in this position. So as much to the right of the camera as possible. The thing is, there is an anti-slip or anti-reverse mechanism. So there is a little latch down here that will engage. It's like a little pointy thing that will engage between the teeth of this gear. So basically, when you wind the camera, I don't know if you can see it, it's there. When you wind the camera, that little claw is pushed aside. When you release, it will be pulled back towards the gear and it will lodge itself between the teeth. Now obviously, imagine that you have, this is the gear, these are the teeth, and this is that piece. It's something like this. At the end of the motion, the winding motion, when you reach the hard stop given by a slit in a gear in which a pin resides, so pretty much you turn a gear until that pin hits the edges, the ends of the slit, and that's when you stop advancing because there is no physical possibility to advance anymore. The tip of this little claw can be either here, so tip on tip. It can be here, tip on groove, or it can be here. It doesn't matter if it's here or if it's here. So better said, it can be tip on tip or tip on groove. If it's tip on groove, the moment you release the winding knob, everything stops, because this um, tip of the latch is already engaged in the groove between two teeth of that gear, so the motion is suddenly stopped. But if the end of the motion catches these two parts in this configuration, so tip on tip, when you release the winding knob, this gear will slip back until the tip of the latch engages in the groove. Hope it makes sense. So when you have tip on tip, you advance, and when you release, you have a little play, a little not bounce back, a little play in the knob. Okay, so from this maximum winding position, the entire system will go back just slightly. So that little prong, from being somewhere almost beneath this tip of the latch, goes back and rests in the slot, and that is the happy position where it will release every time. If instead the end cycle catches these two parts with the tip in the groove, which is hard to replicate, but it's the position where the bounce back, the free play is at a minimum, so pretty much it will not go back. It's more like this. And what happened, or what was happening, was that when I was pushing down on the shutter button, the latch itself would touch on that prong and would halt it, or slow its motion for an incredibly small amount of time. You can't see it with your eye, but you can, I don't know, you can see that it's happening. You can feel that it's happening. And by doing that, this traveler would actually have time to catch up, to slip beyond this this tip of the latch and get stuck in this area with the prong, if that makes any sense. Okay, so I thought about it and I decided to modify the latch again. And by modify, I mean I actually rounded off the underside of this pointy part, because that's the part that would actually touch on the prong, and rounding this point, this tip, would not affect the overall functionality, because the traveler is hitting this part, not the actual tip, but the inner surface. So I just rounded it off a bit with a rubber thing like this, so something very soft, nothing aggressive. And then I polished with a metal polish paste and a brush the entire surface, so all that is here, the underside, and a bit on here on top, so that parts can glide as easy as possible. Now I could probably also add a bit of lubricant, a bit of oil, on like a very fine film of oil on this surface, so things would slip even better. Now ever since I did that, I wasn't able to replicate the behavior, so I think I actually managed to fix it. Okay, and that leaves us with this issue that I am going to talk about in a second. Alright, so pretty much so far so good, I suppose. Okay, and for the last part about the skipping frames issue, Meisenberg's book talks about this problem on the Fed2 chapter, and it says there are two possible causes. One is below this little cap and is actually the screw that keeps this restricting gear in place being loose. Now I know for sure this one is not loose. Oh, what do you know? It was loose. What the hell? Well, I don't think it was loose enough for this thing to happen, but I'm going to really tighten it down. Now you need a custom screwdriver, so something that is very narrow but quite wide, if that makes sense. So wide blade but narrow profile. Okay, and the explanation is the fact that when the screw is loose, the gear can tilt, and when it tilts, it can kind of skip a tooth. I think in the meshing between this one and then the next one. Also, the book says that when this happens, there is a good chance of wear on that gear on the inside, the part where groove is carved, and that groove is what's responsible of limiting the motion of the shutter. So in case there is damage to that groove, you need to take out the gear and kind of hit it with a hammer or something to, I wouldn't say readjust, but to try to revert it to its original shape. That's one cause. The other cause would be loose pins. So either this pin loose or the other one. The issue is apparently very rare and unlikely. It's not the case with my camera. So hopefully I have solved both issues. The shutter curtain bounce remains. I don't think I have any kind of solution for that. That wouldn't imply taking the camera apart again. But from what I've seen, it's not actually visible in the pictures. It does bounce, but kind of the little edge that gets exposed is probably kind of masked by the design of the lens mount, maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to really think about that for too much. All right, because I haven't seen any kind of light leaks in my pictures, so I will assume that it's actually working correctly. Alright, that's about it. I'm just going to reassemble the camera and I'm going to think about my next video or series, which will probably be about that shutter tester, the more complicated one. And after that, I might, but I'm not going to promise, I might make a series on a Kiev. So Kiev 4 or 4A. I've got 2 or 3 of those. And I'm a bit scared, to be honest, because it's a camera that's quite complex. Actually, it's one of the most complex cameras that I've ever worked on, and yeah, it's a bit scary. Things could go wrong. I think this pressure washer should be upside down. No. Okay, thank you for watching. I will see you next time.